Today on the Big 3 in 30, new eligibility rules in the NCAA.
The NCAA Division I cabinet voted unanimously.
College football programs look to bounce back after their coaches left this offseason.
Iowa State needs to be successful this year, and I think they brought in the right group to do it.
And Ole Miss lands a 4-star recruit on the offensive line.
Alabama led for this kid like 90%.
This is the Big 3 in 30 College, the three biggest stories on campus from our local experts at the Locked On Podcast Network. We bring you the real story, why it matters, what's next, who wins the big game, and more, all in 30 minutes. The Big 3 in 30 College starts now. Thank you for making the Big 3 in 30 your first listen of the day, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Oregon is sorting through what the NCAA's new 5-year eligibility model could mean for roster building. Spencer McLaughlin with Locked On Ducks explains the impact.
The story of the day, the NCAA Division I cabinet voted unanimously to advance to the kind of final vote stage of sorts, the idea of giving 5-5 eligibility to all NCAA athletes. And obviously, yes, that includes all of Oregon's athletes. So I'm going to keep this discussion to football for now. This can be applied to any Oregon sport. The impact that this would have, should it get approved, which it should, and I think it's a very good idea, the impact that this would have on Oregon's roster is minimal to non-existent. And the reason I say that is if this goes through, what could happen, this would technically be possible, is players who are in their 4th year right now could gain a 5th year of eligibility if they're willing to go to court and sort those things out. They'd probably win, maybe, if they were going to spend that amount of time. And players who are in, rising true sophomore positions, Nasir Wyatt, Brandon Finney, Decorian Moore. There are others, but those are the ones that pop into my head right now. Those players could theoretically, if they want, play at Oregon for 5 years. That is, if this passes, on the table. There's no way that's going to happen. Boy, it would be awesome if it did. But guys that could get extra eligibility out of this and add time to their Oregon career are going to be going off to the NFL draft. So it would be fantastic if between Mateo Uiagalelei and Tatum Tuioti, even one of them decided, if this passes, you know what? I'm not ready for the NFL yet. I want a 5th year of college football. I want to come back to the Ducks. I'll say yes to either one of those guys in a heartbeat or less. But unfortunately, but also fortunately, every guy that could make a big impact or benefit, I just see him going off to the NFL. Oregon's lucky to have some of these guys as it is, Mateo and Tatum included. So for those who have not been keeping up with this particular suggestion, I've talked about it a lot over on Locked On College Football, but the 5-5 eligibility model would start for the 2026 class and for everybody in 2027, but then current players and the 26 class that'd be affected would have the chance to operate under the new model for their eligibility or continue under the old one, and they would determine what is in the best interest of that particular student athlete. 5-5 says from the time you graduate high school or turn 19, basically you have 5 years to play 5 seasons of college football. This does not invoke any transfer portal restrictions. This does not say anything else. That's all it is. The goal, and I think this is a good goal from the NCAA, is to try and standardize the eligibility across college sports. It is complex. It is inconsistent. It is not good for coaches. I don't think fans particularly enjoy it. And by the way, it's not very good for players either, many of whom have to spend time in a courtroom, find money to be able to be in a courtroom. Some of them don't win, then they're left in limbo. And there's all this sort of stuff. And those, I'm just referring to high profile cases. I know there are even smaller ones in which guys are left sitting there going, well, I don't know if I'm able to play or not. So giving everybody 5 years, and you can play for 5 years. It's not 4 to play in 5, it's 5 in 5. But this means no red shirts, no gray shirts, nothing. The only exemptions that you can get for delaying when your 5-year eligibility window would end are there are 3. Pregnancy, military service, religious mission. So Gatlin Bear, for instance, would not come back from his mission as he is this year. If this rule had been applied several years ago, he would come into this season, and even though he's older, he would have 5 years. That's the anomaly, though. Nobody else is actually going to be able to do that. And the total number of athletes that those exemptions will apply to, I think, is going to wind up being pretty small. At Oregon, it's a very, very small number. So I don't think this will radically impact recruiting strategy, roster building, or anything like that in a major way. And guys that could come back or that you would love to have back for a 5th year if they became eligible, if this goes through, like Poncho. Oregon's lucky to have Poncho as their starting center right now. He's a Remington Award finalist last year. He might win the award this year. If that happens, he's not coming back to college for another year. Heck, Brandon Finney and DeCorian Moore are probably going to be 3 and done. If you get a 4th year out of guys like that, it'd be a major win. So the number of football players, or frankly, any athlete, when you have an unlimited number of transfers that's going to commit to Oregon out of high school and stay for all 5 years, pretty small number. I think the most common type of player, frankly, that would do that are the Will Stratton types, the Bryce Betcher types, the guys that were walk-ons once upon a time, or that were not football players necessarily, but have become football players. And Bryce Betcher, of course, grew into having a big role. I don't think Will Stratton is doing that, but Will Stratton's probably on the 2 or 3 deep at linebacker going into this year, probably closer to 3rd on the depth chart is where I'd put him going into the season. I think that's the most common type of guy that would stay out of school for 5 years. You saw Nate Biddle do this in basketball, but he had to get eligible. And there are no red shirts or nothing. The downside of this, and it's really the only downside, is that players who have careers plagued by injuries are not able to play the same number of sporting events as everybody else. And while I freely admit that that's a part of it, I think the positives vastly outweigh the negatives here. I think this would be good for college sports as a whole. I think it would make things a lot easier for everybody involved to just know, okay, you have 5 years. You don't have to not play in a certain number of games to preserve a red shirt. Like, remember in 20, what season am I trying to refer to? 24. Yeah, when sometimes 25. Sometimes we'd see Luke Moga come in. Sometimes we'd see Austin Novosad come in because they got to protect the red shirt of those guys. There's none of that anymore. And look, it might change the calculus for some players if you're not able to redshirt. But if your plan was to redshirt all along, I don't think that alters whether or not you want to go to a particular school or not. Because I would have redshirted under the old rule. Well, now you have 5 years to play if you want. So you have a year. Basically, everybody gets a redshirt year, but you can play. And if you get hurt and you lose a season like Evan Stewart did last year, everybody gets that extra 5th year. So overall impact on Oregon, I don't think there are going to be a lot of guys. You might see a couple, perhaps, that try to fight this thing out if they're currently on the roster. I mean, that maybe don't have NFL prospects that would like to come back, but they've only been with Oregon for 4 years. Like Jerry Mixon might fit into that particular mold. All right, that could work. I think Oregon's got plenty of linebacker depth if they don't bring Jerry Mixon back for the 2027 season. But hey, he's experienced. He's going to be one of your top 2 linebackers this year. I can see that being a benefit for sure. But this would be a pretty substantial rule change in college sports. Hence why I wanted to bring it up on today's show. But overall, I just think Oregon brings guys in, and by year 4, from a high school recruiting standpoint, I think by the time year 4 comes to an end for them, I think they have either transferred out or they are ready to go play in the NFL. That's the most common outcome there.
Running a business shouldn't feel like you're trying to connect a bunch of systems that were never designed to work together. One app for accounting, another for inventory, another for sales, and somehow none of them talk to each other. That's where Odoo comes in. Odoo is an all-in-one business management software that brings every part of your business together in one powerful platform. From sales and accounting to inventory and marketing, everything works in one place, helping your team move faster, stay organized, and focus on growing the business instead of managing software. The best organizations know that success isn't just about talent. It's about having everyone working toward the same goal. And that's true in sports just as it is in business. The Knicks acquired a bunch of pieces from different teams, Jalen Brunson, Karl Anthony Towns, OG Anunoby, and got everyone pulling in the same direction. It wasn't just one great player or coach. It was a coordinated effort across the entire organization that made it successful. Great organizations win because operations matter, and that's why you should get Odoo. Try free today at odoo.com/lockedon. That's odoo.com/lockedon. Welcome back to the Big 3 and 30 NFL. Iowa State and Utah are both trying to steady the program after replacing longtime coaches Matt Campbell and Kyle Whittingham. Nick Maraveth with Locked On Cyclones and JT Wistrell with Locked On Utes talk it through.
Iowa State needs to be successful this year, and I think they've brought in the right group to do it. You bring up, this is a fun squad. Like, it's interesting. I am just as intrigued as you are. I do not know for sure what's going to happen, but I'm excited to find out.
Yeah, it's going to be fun. And you bring in more than 50 Cyclones have entered the transfer portal. So it's a lot of new coming in there. You had over 16 starters last year. I think from a Utah standpoint, even though this is on the road, I feel good about Utah's chances right now because, Nick, sometimes these transfer portal things come together. They work. It's magic. It's awesome right away. It's tough, though, early in the season. And for the most part, I feel like seeing this many new pieces come together, facing a team that, in Utah, to me, look, you're going to see a lot of preseason rankings that have this team in the top 25. I think that's fair. I'd have Utah third in the Big 12 right now. I think anywhere from 3 to even 6 somewhere, maybe a 7 spot, because you see what an Arizona, Houston can bring on as well, too. I think that's that kind of second tier of teams outside of a Tech and a BYU. But how confident are you that this can gel quickly? I mean, you guys got quite the test week 2 going to Iowa coming up as well. So you guys will learn soon what this team is going to be like, at least in the month of September.
Yeah, well, they'll be playing at Kinnick at night. That is going to be a very challenging game. Obviously, the Cyhawk is always a fun one to watch, but that one's going to be a real test of Jimmy Rogers and then, of course, Jalen Rayner. You bring up kind of like the gelling of this big transfer portal class. And yes, they're coming from all over the place, but a lot of guys are following Jimmy Rogers from Washington State. So there is a level of familiarity that we're gaining from those kinds of players. During spring ball, there was a big conversation about the Washington State guys actually staying after with transfers, or Iowa State guys from years prior, teaching them the system, teaching them the cues, where are they lining up, what are they looking for, those kinds of things. So you're kind of getting some coaching built in with the players. There's a lot to really be optimistic about in that sense, but of course you always are going to wonder, right? Who's going to step up in the wide receiver room? Is the quarterback and Jalen Rayner going to connect with those wide receivers, because he's not the Washington State guy. He's coming from Arkansas State and is a Sun Belt Conference quarterback going to make the jump to the Power 4 that Iowa State needs. So a lot of question marks, obviously, with it being a transfer portal heavy team. Ridiculously heavy. I believe Oklahoma State maybe has us by a guy, but really other than that, we're 1 and 2. So very, very heavy in the transfer portal. But I think there is a little bit of hope, just considering how many guys followed from SDSU to Washington State and then from Washington State to Iowa State.
I think it's interesting anytime you talk about a new team, there's going to be a lot of eyes that are, I guess, with every team is going to go to the quarterback. For Utah, I feel very good about Devin Dampier. I think if you were to say, like, what's the reason, despite Utah's losses, the Utes are still in the top 25, I'd say it's Dampier, Big 12 newcomer of the year, one of the best dual threat quarterbacks in the country. He definitely needs to hone in on his accuracy a little more, but hey, he made a ton of amazing plays and was battling most of last season with an injury. So I have confidence in Devin Dampier's ability to go on the road and get Big 12 wins based on what he showed. How confident are you that Rayner is going to be effective at the P4 level? And it is, I mean, seeing an Iowa and a Utah defense first few weeks of the season, Nick, that's tough sledding for any new quarterback making the jump up to the P4.
Absolutely. The thing I really like about Jalen Rayner is his legs. We haven't really gotten a ton of that in the past. Obviously, Rocco had some running elements to his game, but we also saw what happened against Cincinnati, and really after that game, there wasn't a lot of running from Rocco. Jalen Rayner, I think, is a lot closer to, if any Utah fans are Iowa State history buffs, Seneca Wallace, way back. Not super recent, but he's kind of got that style a little bit to him. And I do think that Iowa State is going to be very run heavy this season. And with essentially Jalen Rayner's legs, they'll be able to field 11 guys on offense as opposed to, sometimes you talk about you got 10 guys on offense because the quarterback's not really in every play. I think that Jalen Rayner is going to be used heavily in that regard. And so even if he's not the most accurate, even if his sense in the pocket isn't perfect, you can just rely on his legs, speed option, quarterback power, whatever it is. I think you got a lot of options there. And so it was a really, really solid pickup considering where the program's at.
It's going to be interesting to see in this matchup against Utah, because you mentioned his legs. Well, Utah's weakness overall, I'd probably say, like you say, what's the thing that concerns you most coming into the season? You could say it's 5 new stars up front for Utah. It's more so the run defense. I mean, you look at the Kansas State and the Kansas game down the stretch last year, it was bad. So it's an entirely new defensive line. None of those guys are really proven good players at the P4 level, I'd say, yet. I like some of the freshmen, what they showed last year for Utah, but they got to make the sophomore leap. Linebackers got to be more consistent tackling, and even the defensive ends have to prove they can set the edge consistently. Look, Utah's defense looked decent against Nebraska in the bowl game, but that Cornhuskers team was absolutely abysmal. So that'll be the question for Utah, is how do they stop the run? And I'm curious to see how this Iowa State team will run the ball, Nick, because it's a very new offensive line for you guys, right? How confident are you that this group can come together quickly?
Yeah, the offensive line is always going to be a question mark, especially when you don't have a lot of returners. And the big thing that I talk about with the offensive line is it's not always the 5 best guys. It's the 5 guys who play the best together. It's kind of the order of the words in that sentence that matters a lot. And so can Tyler Roll and Jimmy Rogers find the really perfect set of 5 before the season starts, and who gets in at tight end, and what exactly are their responsibilities? Obviously, I don't know if you guys heard this over in Salt Lake City, the big tiff around the Jalen Jackson running back, and then we bring in Arnold Barnes from Tulane. So the running back situation is really interesting for Iowa State. I do think like Cam Petaway and Naden Flora are going to step up big time, but it does come down to that offensive line. Can they protect, of course, Jalen Rayner, and then create the holes for the running backs to run through? I think Iowa State's going to be big in the run game. I think that's a focus, but I don't know if that doesn't mean they're going to be good, Yeah. That just means that's where they want to be good. And I think if you focus there, you can see a lot of paid off dividends in the long run, but that it doesn't guarantee you anything. So I'm very much curious about this offensive line. Like you said, big transfer portal class.
Yeah, and being good in September versus maybe October, November, when this group gets more games under their belt together, is going to be interesting to see. And I actually think it's an advantage for you guys. Look, it's going to be tough to win and beat Iowa, but it's okay that you see them early, because it gets you more ready for the Utah game, I'd say, rather than, I think it's Indiana loves to schedule the cupcakes early on. Obviously, they win a ton, but when you schedule cupcakes, you don't set yourself up for, hey, what's this going to be like? Utah sees Arkansas early in Salt Lake City. So that's the type of game, hey, let's test ourselves against a P4 opponent before we get set for Big 12 conference action.
Welcome back to the Big 3 in 30 College. Ole Miss kept a top in-state target home with 4-star defensive lineman Mitchell Turner. Stephen Willis with Locked On Ole Miss walks through the pickup.
Alabama led for this kid like 90%, according to the prediction matrix, for months, including this month. Then Pete Golding and Randall Joyner went to work and ran the Tide out of Mississippi. This commitment, it kind of changes the class. At 4 o'clock Central Time yesterday afternoon, the best defensive lineman in the state of Mississippi looked at Alabama, looked at Ole Miss, and kind of chose to stay home. Mitchell Turner is a rebel, and I need you to understand something. Stay with me here. This is not just another commitment. This is Mitchell Turner out of Louisville, Mississippi, a 4-star defensive lineman, the number 6 defensive lineman in the entire country, the number 2 overall player in the state of Mississippi, and the number 60 prospect nationally. This is a blue chip, big time, everybody wanted him type of recruit. And for months, this recruitment had one name written all over it, and that was Alabama. And, it makes sense that it would be that way as well. So here's how close that Ole Miss came to losing this athlete. Alabama hadn't led the prediction machine for this kid at 90%. Nick Saban's old shop with Freddie Roach, everybody remembers Freddie, doing the recruiting, had Turner on the official visit to Tuscaloosa back in May. And just about every insider in the country had him penciled into the Crimson Tide at that point. He looked gone. He looked exactly like the kind of in-state star that used to leave Mississippi without a second thought, if we're going to be honest about it. Then Pete Golding and Randall Joyner kind of went to work. Turner took his official visit in Oxford. They got him on campus in early June, and the Rebels knocked it out of the park. You know the old saying, if you don't want to go to Ole Miss, don't visit it. Well, that happened. Turner visited Ole Miss, fell in love with the place. They knocked it out of the park. And on the 19th, 3 different rivals expert flipped their predictions to Ole Miss on the very same day. The machine swung from 90% Alabama all the way to 90+% Ole Miss. It was pretty interesting to see. And yesterday afternoon at 4 o'clock, it became official. Mitchell Turner is staying home. Now, the flip side of that, literally the flip side of that, is Benjarvius Shoemaker flipped to Colorado, who is another 4-star big-time defensive tackle in the state of Mississippi. Now, let me make this perfectly clear. He shut down his recruitment like 10 hours before he flipped his commitment. I don't know if I'm going to jump on this one way or another. I think he ultimately ends up signing at Ole Miss when it's all said and done. And I think it's going to be one of those things where he ultimately plays football at Ole Miss. But he did flip, and that's important to talk about as well. But that's another reason why this Turner commitment matters so much. It's more than just one name on the list. You and I say it every single week. The state of Mississippi always produces defensive linemen. And if you want to win in the SEC, you need to start keeping them home. And while Golding has kept one of the best ones at home, and he did it by beating Alabama straight up inside of the state of Mississippi for a Mississippi kid. I think Mississippi State was a little bit involved there as well. Being from Louisville, it's kind of its proximity to Starkville. That would make sense. But this is a statement that a Pete Golding, he's planting a flag and telling Tuscaloosa, it's not going to be the same way as it used to be. You're not going to be able to just waltz in and take ours anymore. And he's not doing it alone. Listen, Turner becomes the 2nd defensive lineman in this 2027 class with Jamarcus Pittman. That's a load. In-state anchored defensive line haul, although Pittman's from Memphis. But you get my point. It's right down the road. It's understandable the context here because On3's own scouting director said it out loud. The state of Mississippi this year is absolutely stacked in the defensive line, with 3 different players ranked inside the rivals' top 10 nationally at their positions. 3 in one state, in one class. That is the type of in-state talent that when it leaves, goes off and finds somebody else. They usually win a good bit. And that's one of the things that we're going to be watching the Shoemaker situation with, because that's a really good, high-rated defensive tackle that is going off potentially. But Pete Golding's making sure that it doesn't necessarily happen. There's not a lead. He's fencing in the border if he gets somebody like Mitchell Turner, the top defensive lineman in the state of Mississippi. Stack this group right next to the offensive line that we've been telling you about all month, and the picture starts to get very clear very fast. One thing that I'm really interested about is looking at the film of this player, because he is a really good player, like a special player that pops off of the video to you. And Mitchell Turner's tape itself is just filthy. It's nasty. So stay with me, because the number I'm about to give you is one of the most absurd stat lines I've ever seen from a high school defensive lineman, okay? As a junior, Mitchell Turner put up 103 tackles. As a defensive lineman, that's important to remember. He's 285 pounds. He had 41 tackles for loss. He had 15 and a half sacks, 41 tackles for loss. Let me say that again so it sinks all the way in. 41 times last year, Mitchell Turner blew up the play in the other team's backfield before it had a chance to develop. He didn't just play in the backfield, he kind of lived there. So what does he actually look like on tape? Charles Power, the scouting director at On3, saw this coming from, and I pulled a lot of this straight from On3's evaluation of him. Charles Power called him a dynamic, coordinated defensive lineman who makes plays behind the line of scrimmage at a high rate. That's kind of a dub, but okay. He has an outstanding first step and great instincts, phenomenal pad level and leverage. He stays low, and he's tough enough to block off the ball, and he has a high-end lateral agility, the kind that, in their words, makes offensive linemen whiff in a phone booth. That's weird that you hear about phone booth quickness about a defensive lineman. He has a compact base, natural balance, and a bend. He hunts plays down, so he can also anchor and eat blocks as a run defender. Over at 247 Sports, Gabe Brooks says the same thing. An attacking frontline defender who gets on top of blockers quickly and with power, with the suddenness of a zigzag to redirect his way loose. Now, I'm going to be honest with you, because the everydayers don't necessarily do fluff what's going on. Turner is not a measurable monster. He's not somebody that is going to go to the combine and win. He's 6'1.5", 285 pounds, with arms a tick under 33 inches, okay? On paper, that is undersized for a top defensive lineman. He's not going to win the get off the bus contest, for instance. But here's the thing. That doesn't matter, because he plays a lot bigger than what his frame is. And the comparisons tell that exact story. On3 says he reminds him of Jerzon Newton, the Illinois disruptor who went in the second round of the 2024 NFL draft. Same height, same undersized, but unblockable profile. Kind of reminds me a little bit bigger Isaac Gross, and that's a good place to be. And our crossover with Brian Smith, the Florida football scout, Brian compared his first step and his hand and foot quickness to Aaron Donald. Now, nobody is promising you that Aaron Donald is walking through the doors, but when scouts keep reaching for names like that, it tells you something. It tells you the type of player that they're talking about. And here is why the fit is perfect. Remember, our biggest defensive complaint from last season, Ole Miss couldn't get to the quarterback without blitzing, because their defensive back was so poor, they didn't want to put them on an island, so they needed to get pressure from the front. They needed a natural four-man pass rush. Mitchell Turner provides exactly that. He's a guy who lets Pete Golding drop 7 into coverage, or 8, and still get home with the front. Hand him to Randall Joyner, the best defensive line developer I can remember, one of the best recruiters on this staff, and you're talking about a future problem for the entire rest of the SEC. That's the player. That's why this one matters. And that is an example of exactly why you should be paying attention to this.
That's all for today's Big 3 and 30 College. If you follow pro basketball or football, the Big 3 and 30 has shows for the biggest news in the NBA and NFL going up every weekday just like this one. Just search the Big 3 and 30 NBA or the Big 3 and 30 NFL wherever you're listening or watching now. Thanks again for tuning in to the Big 3 and 30 College.